One of the more unusual facets of real estate law is the principle of adverse possession. Adverse possession says that if someone takes over your land and you don't do anything about it for a set time, then you lose your land and they get it. The purpose originally was to make sure that all land was being used in an efficient way, that you didn't have landowners who owned land and had no idea what was going on at that land. And so the purpose is really to make sure and maximize that real estate value. Of course, for an owner to lose land is a pretty big deal, so there are specific tests that have to be met under the law to make sure that everybody's rights are protected. In order to be in adverse possession, the possession has to be hostile, actual, open and notorious, and exclusive and continuous. I want to talk about each of those in turn. It has to be hostile, which means that it has to be without permission from the landowner. So a renter, for example, has the permission of the landowner to be there. That's not hostile. And by the same token, if the landowner lets you come on his land, lets you do things on his land, then that's not going to be hostile. It has to be something that's without permission. The next factor is actual. It has to be physical possession. It can't just be a document somewhere. You have to actually be on the land, there where you could be seen by anybody. It has to be open and notorious, and that has to be, again, obvious to onlookers. If somebody came along, they could see that you were using the land. So it might be fencing involved. There might be some kind of use of the land that anybody walking by could see that it's somebody other than the landowner who's using the land. And finally, it has to be exclusive and continuous. So it has to be use that's to the owner's exclusion and has to be constant. If you're just walking onto the person's land, sometimes that doesn't count. You have to be using it in a way that the owner can't use that land to the extent that you're using it. Keep in mind that the theory of the law is to make sure that an owner who's kind of sleeping on his rights and has no idea what's going on at his land, that's the owner that's going to be covered by adverse possession. So if you keep that theory in mind, then in a specific situation, it can give you a better idea of whether the principle of adverse possession applies. Now the question arises, how long does this adverse possession have to occur before the person gets the land from the owner? The answer is it varies under Arizona law. There are different situations. If the person who's using the land who's not the owner has some sort of color of title, meaning they have a deed or some kind of reason to believe that they're the owner of the land, then the statute of limitations is either 3 years or 5 years, meaning that that person would become the owner of the land after either 3 years or 5 years, depending on whether the land is a city lot or not. If the person who's using the land who's not the owner does not have any color of title, in other words, they don't have any reason to believe they're the rightful owner of the land, then the statute of limitations is 10 years, and they would become the owner after 10 years. Once the statute of limitations, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, has run, then the person who has occupied the land adversely possessed the land, in other words, can go to court and become the rightful owner of the property. Usually these situations don't come up in a context of an entire parcel. Most often an adverse possession claim comes up in the context of a fence that was built in the wrong place, maybe a driveway that goes over the property line, something like that. And if that driveway or that fence has been in place for a long time, then the principles of adverse possession operate to make sure that that driveway or that fence stays where it is. But the principles of adverse possession can apply to allow a landowner to lose their title in their entire property. So it's useful for landowners who maybe aren't at their property for extended periods of time to be really aware of what the laws are so they can protect themselves.